Ruth chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Verses 8 to 10. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in other fields, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And wherever you are thirsty, go get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Verses 14 through 16. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Donna, and good morning, everybody. Good morning to those of you who are joining us on live stream. If the passage that Donna just read this morning feels or sounds familiar to you, then that means you're paying attention, because it is from the same passage that we did last week, right? Ruth 2. So Larry and I didn't screw up. This is intentional. But we have these two passages in a row because we're kind of looking at it from different perspectives, which you can often do when you read scripture, right? There's different themes that come out. And last week, Preacher Larry gave us a good word about God showing up in the most unexpected ways and circumstances, especially when we take risks and we go outside of the dots, the box. And so we're continuing that thread today with a stranger twist. Okay, so as we continue our series, what if we are living more fully into Wellspring's Word of the Year for 2025, which is imagining the possibilities when we start our questions with, what if? So today we're posing the question, what if we treated strangers as our neighbor? Oh, I like that. That was good. You guys keep doing that. Okay. And I want to first start out by saying that within the walls of Wellspring and our church community, you're so good at that already. You really are. I mean, I think when we speak to people that come and visit and we ask them about first impressions, they usually do say that, "Oh gosh, your church was so welcoming. We didn't feel like a stranger." And so, just keep that up. Just want to affirm all of you. And today in our annual meeting, I think you'll be able to see too, as we talk about some of the ministry highlights, that Wellspring has partnered with several places and people and organizations where strangers have become our neighbors and even mission friends. So we're excited to share that with you this afternoon after this church worship. So consider this. What if God wants to invite you to cast a wider net and live into being fishers of people, of neighbors, of friends who can be a support and an encouragement and a source of joy and a neighbor in Christ to you? What if that took you out of your comfort zone into a strange place with new faces and not knowing what to expect? Out of your comfort zone could be possibly going away to college for the first time, or starting a new job where you don't know anybody, or even going to a lunch or a dinner party that you've been invited to and you really aren't sure who's going to be there, right? Becoming a new member of a club, going to a church for a first time. The only thing in any of those surroundings that you can be certain of is a sense that God is present and part of the plan, even if it leaves you wondering at times. Just like Ruth and Boaz. So I want to recap from the last few weeks of our preaching team unpacking the book of Ruth. This is a narrative that is all about people stepping out to take a risk and seeing how God shows up to bless them. And in case you need a refresher, these are the characters. We have Naomi and Ruth, who are mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, right? So Ruth is daughter-in-law. And both of them have a very low rank in society because of the fact that they are women. But Ruth, too, she's also, I'm sorry, both of them are also widows. That's an added feature. But for Ruth herself, she is a Moabite. And as they're going to Bethlehem and they're in this place, that means that she's a foreigner in strange land, right? And so during that time, really had to watch out for the fact that she was in different surroundings, right? Something very, very unfamiliar. And this passage, actually, as I read this, it has become so relevant for what our country is undergoing today as immigrants, right? Who live with fears of uncertain times and futures, and they're facing permanent deportation and separation from loved ones, as well as their enduring livelihood. What's going to happen, right, if they're removed? And we see also in this passage that there's a social stratification in Ruth's story, because Boaz is this wealthy landowner, and then you have his people that are all working hard in the fields, men and women. But we know from reading these scriptures that he is a caring man, and he seems to really take care of his workers, even the women. And more than even in today's world, that is so important, to be kind and caring and engaging with those who feel very much like they are foreigners or strangers. And then there's Naomi, part of society, and I'd say she's battling depression. If I had to diagnose her, I'd say she's battling depression and bitterness, and she's isolated herself in her despair. So they make up their own perfect society, right? Perfectly imperfect society. So normal depiction of people in society today. But Ruth, we see, is determined to stay faithful to God as she sacrifices so much of herself to care for her mother-in-law and to risk her own life in being a foreigner. And so to summarize this story, Ruth risked being a stranger, and in return, a stranger welcomed her as a neighbor. Boaz took notice of Ruth after hearing that she had asked permission to glean in his field, which meant basically she was picking up all the leftover grains that they would leave for her in the field. And Ruth humbly expressed gratitude and even surprise that she had found favor in Boaz's eyes. And Boaz's kindness, it included letting her drink water when she was thirsty, right? And to stay in his particular area because that would mean that she was safer. And inviting her to sit at the table and partake food with one another. And I would add, as hard as it is to be a stranger, I think it's sometimes hard to be neighborly, because I don't know. I think Boaz was really going against the grain, right, to do that during that time, right? So sometimes it's hard not only to be the stranger, but to be the one that's going to be neighborly in those situations, especially when we might be introverts, or maybe we just don't like people, or maybe we don't like to talk to people for that matter, right? And my sense of Boaz is that he was a kind man, but not necessarily this loud, boisterous personality, as we will see in the chapters that are coming up. But he is honorable, and he is caring. And both he and Ruth are receptive to following God and moving from strangers to neighbors. So I'm going to start out already with just giving you my main points today. So if you have your bulletin, moving from the mindset of a stranger to a neighbor, it means shifting our mindset. It means moving from this others mindset to a one another mindset. It's really subtle, from others to one another. And Ruth does this with her mother-in-law by staying the course of hardship with her day in and day out, looking out for them by finding ways to feed them, working really hard. And Boaz, he not only exemplifies the mindset of one anotherness by inviting Naomi to take from his field, but he actively demonstrates this shift in mindset to being neighborly. And that goes to our second point, which is it's about inviting one another to an open table with open hands and an open heart. So I stress open, right? Open table, open hands, and open heart. And Ruth would never imagined, I know she wouldn't have imagined during that time sitting at the table sharing a meal with Boaz's workers at that time, but he invited her. God is always at work for good. And in this story, Jesus had yet to be born to teach us this way of one anotherness. But when he did come to live as human and divine among us, he said in John 13, verses 34 through 35, a new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. Boaz did not treat Ruth as an other, but brought her into the circle, which I'm sure, again, was shocking for their time and culture. God is always at work for good, even though we don't hear any dialogue that's going on in this story between God and the people. He is present. And when God shows up, there is a reason. There is something that he is always inviting us to be a part of. So the question to you is, will you say yes? Will we treat strangers as our neighbor, as uncomfortable as it is? Will we risk being the stranger at times and be invited to an open table of one another who are new people to us? Not easy. I have to say, some of you know, because I'm up here preaching, I had told the pastor team that I wasn't going to preach from January through probably through May, just because I was really going to pour into studies to try to finish up. And so me being up here today, I've had a couple people say, I thought you weren't going to preach. And I'm trying to work on my boundaries and all of that, my saying no. But I said yes in this case because when I saw what the theme was for Sunday today, I got really excited. I got really excited because I thought, I have a story. I have a story that I want to share, and we're going to hear from Pat Pye too later about in this story. So I just want to kind of recap for some of you that don't know that I'm currently in my 4th year of seminary, trying to finish, crawling to the finish line. And it was really important for me, even though a lot of you know that I've been like pastoring for a while, it was really important for me to go to school and get the biblical and theological sound training and to equip me so that I would be a better pastor and hopefully a better person. And while I know, there's a lot of Fuller graduates here, but I am currently attending North Park, which is affiliated with our denomination, the ECC. So I represent North Park. And I just want to say that I am so grateful because in the training and the studying and the curriculum that they've really opened my eyes to different areas of spiritual formation and care, and to the importance of multi-generational and intercultural ministry and worship, and an awareness of the impact that Christianity has had, both good and bad, on civil rights and the rights of indigenous people and their lands. So, the story that I want to share with you begins in the fall of 2023 when I was sitting in a ECC history class. And that class is all about talking about the Evangelical Covenant Church and its origins and how it made its way here to the United States and then into different areas in their mission field. And one of them is Alaska. And in this class, I was sitting there and we happened to Zoom with the superintendent of Alaska, Curtis Ivanoff, who some of you remember was here later in the later part of last year and shared about Alaska. And he talked a lot about the history and how the gospel made its way into the lands and the villages of Alaska. And for some reason, I was just so stirred by the story, really stirred. And so, of course, you know, with school, we have to do projects. And I thought, I want to interview Curtis. I want to do an oral history project on him, because that was the assignment, to do an oral history project. But as we talked and as he shared, he was the one that brought to my attention, Alaska and Hawaii, we really have a lot in common. We really do. And one is their history of lands being taken away unjustly, right? And one is the native people's quest to really preserve their culture while still being and living in the here and now. And that the people of Alaska and the people of Hawaii have really similar characteristics of having a heart for community and for one another. And so I was learning more about Alaska. I was learning about the not so good stuff. And for Alaska in particular, it was the exploitation of their land way back for mining, gold mining, for fishing, for trapping, and other economic gain by outsiders who came in to their land. And Alaska would eventually be sold to Russia, and then Russia would turn around and sell it to the United States. And in 1971, there was something really critical that happened, which was called the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And that was going to be an attempt with the United States and Alaska to settle land claims between the Alaska Natives. And while it was cloaked to benefit Alaska Natives, it meant forfeiting 380 million acres of land to the United States for whatever they wanted to do with it. And they were allowed to keep 44 million acres and were also paid $1 billion. And from that, they were going to set up different corporations to help the native Alaska Natives. Okay, so that's what's in place, that's what's happening. And so understandably, there's still a lot of hurt and distrust by the people. There's also the good stuff, which is the history to be told of the gospel being brought to Alaska. And that was in the late 1800s. And, you know, I just want to say, I can see that was like for me a revelation of God really working even before the people knew what was going to happen. And that the first person that set foot to be able to share the gospel was a Swedish missionary whose name was Axel Carlson. And he made his way to Alaska with the intent actually of going on to Russia, right, to serve in Russia. But he befriended a young Eskimo chief. And this Eskimo chief was from Unalakleet, and he said, why don't you come to Unalakleet and meet the people? And so Axel Carlson said yes, and he ended up staying for the rest of his life to serve God and the people as a missionary. They built a church together, they started schools, all of these things. Okay. So there definitely was this stirring, as I heard from Curtis, feeling this connection to the people of Alaska who I hadn't even met yet. And I know that's the Holy Spirit that was doing something. And so in November of 2023, I decided I want to do a bigger project for my class. And my final project would be going to Alaska, doing oral histories, interviewing people that were Alaska Natives, and hearing their stories about the gospel and how the Covenant Church impacted their families, maybe their parents, their lives. And so Nathan and I went with an iPhone to take these videos. And it reflects, you can see when you take the videos, it looks like it was on an iPhone. And we gathered oral histories for reference on what these wonderful people remembered. And so I'm gonna see if this. So this is our first trip when we went to Alaska, and there you see Nathan with an iPhone. After that, I think Pat fired him. But these are pictures of Curtis and I interviewing people in their office in Anchorage, and Curtis was with me in the interviews because, of course, to establish trust, we needed to have somebody there, right? That knew all the people, and this is me interviewing Curtis. So, but these are some of the wonderful people that we met. So this is Helma Shavings. She was married to a pastor. This is Anna Walters, also married to a pastor, and all their husbands have passed on, right? Their husbands have passed on. And Ellen Slocum. And these, again, wonderful pastors' wives who had wonderful stories to tell, not only about the good, but the hardship of even being a pastor's wife, of just being poor, because they didn't get paid salaries or anything. And you see in front of her, she's got some furry things, and those are mucklucks. Those are the boots that you put on. And she was sharing how, she was so good at it that at the Smithsonian, they ended up taking one pair of her mucklucks and featuring her in National Geographic. And she would use her teeth to do a lot of the crafting. And I show her and I emphasize her because we had to go to her house because she was already bedridden. But we went to her house, and why this became so important to me was because in November 2023, we did this interview, and last year got word that she passed away. But her story is now in the archives. Right? So, and this is her generations of her family as we went to visit her. So, yeah. And then Nathan and I went to Soldotna, and if you've seen Keith Hamilton, who's come from Alaska Christian College, this is the road we traveled on to go to Soldotna, Curtis driving, of course, thank God. And we ended up seeing Alaska Christian College, but also interviewing more people, and Joel and Olga Oyumik, who had wonderful stories to tell about Unalakleet, about attending their first boarding school, partaking in the best sourdough pancakes, and being able to, and Olga dressed me in a parka and showed me their clothing, and so it was just a really neat experience to be with them. And so, so here's the thing. The people of Alaska welcomed Nathan and I as strangers to their land, to their homes, into their lives. And then we felt led after that to go back, because we felt less like strangers and more like neighbors, because we felt like there are more stories to collect of people in more remote villages. And this would all be archived. And so we made our way back in August of last year, 2024. And I had asked Donna and Pat to join us to be part of this journey. And initially it was, because Pat has all these great skills, and I think he has more time. He and Donna, and they like to travel. But, again, and they said yes. It was really quick. It was just, yes, we'd love to go. And so we rode in a 20-seat propeller plane. This is us going into Unalakleet from Anchorage. And you can see the village, and it's maybe about, I think, it's probably about 700 people now that live in this village. And as the plane was approaching, aside from being nervous about the plane, it was exciting. As soon as we got off the plane, Curtis, in their one room, I don't know if anyone ever saw Wings, the series from way back before, but the one gate, right? One gate, one room. Yeah. He's introducing us to people because everybody knows each other. It's such a small town, right? And so anyway, we landed in Unalakleet, and we started interviewing a bunch of people. And this is us after we got off the plane, and you see Curtis has crutches, but he persevered. So this is our engineering team. And I just want to show this. This is Axel Carlson's grave. And Donna and I trudged through the long, tall, overgrown grass trying to find this, because I was so determined just to see this, where this man was laid to rest with his wife. And so that was at their cemetery. This is their church. Uniclete Covenant Church, where we did a lot of interviews. We had people come and, so really quaint, welcoming. And then this is, we did interviews all over. I mean, this is Pat. We have to try all different things. So we were outside at one of the interviewees' houses, and we went out to do this interview. So you can see us just in action. And this is Donna Erickson, who does mucklucks too, if you look and see. And they welcomed us into their home for dinner, but we also interviewed them. And Heidi Ivanov, who, amazing woman. I think she's the historian for Uniclete. Everyone seems to go to her, but she's also a judge. They have a judge in Uniclete. And had wonderful stories to tell too. And she really welcomed us into her home too. Because we got stranded, I think, one night. We couldn't fly out. It was so foggy, and she had us come over again. So we felt like we made friends. And this is just us being taken around to see, like, look at that ikura and salmon. And, oh, yeah, we had moose. We had seal oil, not high on my list, but we tried it. More sourdough pancakes. Nathan's really good about going to the open table. Right. And this is how beautiful it was when you look at it. They took us up to the mountain just to kind of see, and it was just beautiful to watch the sun setting. So, and then I think Pat's going to talk a little bit about this, but they have one place to eat. It's a pizza parlor. Really good pizza, but we went and talked with the pastor. And so it was interviews and work, but it was also much blessing as we got to meet more people. And this is us packing salmon to bring home. Yeah. So, and blueberry picking in the tundra. We saw no bears, thankfully. And cooking after some of the salmon that was cooked after we went fishing. So, with that, I want to call up Pat to share his experience.
Hi, everyone. So Donna and I were invited by Pastor Cheryl to help record some oral history stories from people who belong to the Covenant Church in Alaska. And personally, I'll almost always jump at the chance to capture people's stories. I really feel people's stories are meaningful. Personal narratives are not only fascinating, but they're often very rich in wisdom and perspectives that can be helpful for myself and for others. So, I've never actually used this. Okay. So it's about a 6-hour flight from Honolulu to Anchorage, and there is a direct flight on Alaska Airlines, but it's a red eye. So we took this flight over, and then we took a small little propeller plane, which you saw, to Uniclete. Uniclete's a small fishing village. I don't know if this will show. Okay, well, you can't see it, but that little blue circle is where the village of Uniclete is. It's a small fishing village on the Bering Sea with about 700 or so people, and it's only accessible by small airplanes and cargo barges. There aren't any highways or roads to get there from Anchorage. Oh, it's not advancing. Okay, yeah, so that's Uniclete in the distance there. Let me see if I can... Stacy, do you know why it's not advancing? Or does the whole video have to play before it'll advance? Because, okay, well, anyway, we'll just keep going. I'll just cue Stacy then. So there's no highways or roads to get there. You can only basically get there by small airplane. And small airplanes depend on the weather. So sometimes you can get stuck, and we did actually get stuck there for a while. So our host was Curtis Ivanov, as you see here. And Curtis grew up in Uniclete. and he's now the conference director for the ECC in Alaska. Alaska has its own conference. And, we've all, or many of us have met Curtis as he's visited us and preached here at Wellspring. So next slide, please. Okay, so it's a lot of work to set up and record each interview, but Nathan Fu, Pastor Cheryl, and my wife Donna all acted as crew, and they were there to help out with carrying the cameras and lighting equipment, and often this is through puddles and mud in the area. One thing that impressed me is Nathan. He's a lot stronger than I thought, so he is. He grabbed, I had a 50-pound lighting case, and he just grabbed that thing and just carried it everywhere, never complaining, yeah, so the guy's fit. And oh, by the way, if you think, when he does the welcome in the morning, if you think his being loud is an act, he's actually pretty genuine in that. But he also has thick skin, that's why I shared that, so yeah. Next slide, please. So we captured some great stories up there. Those are now, Cheryl has submitted them to the Covenant Archives. And I really enjoyed being a part of this. Curtis and Cheryl interviewed, and as we captured accounts of family and village life there and the early days of the Covenant Church in Alaska. And much of the focus was also on stories from the Covenant High School in Unalakleet, where many people received a really excellent education and a lot of care through the efforts of the church there. But of all these interviews that we went through and the talks that we heard, the one that I was actually most moved by was not planned. We just went to this, there's just one restaurant in Unalakleet, and it's a pizza restaurant. And we went there for lunch one day, and we ran into the pastor of Unalakleet Covenant Church, Pastor Abel. And Pastor Abel grew up on the East Coast. I think it was around New York or in New York State. But then he was living in Florida when he felt called to come to Alaska to serve. And he came planning to become a youth pastor for a little while, and then he was going to move on to prison ministry. He felt that was his calling. Okay. So we're having lunch in this pizza place, and we're just sitting there talking and eating, and, no plans. And all of a sudden, I'm listening to him talk, and I thought, oh, I really love what he's talking about. So I'm slowly pulling out my camera, and people get very self-conscious. You have a camera pointing at them, and this camera has a bigger lens, and so I'm just trying to be very sly about, okay, I'm gonna turn it on. And so when you see clips from this talk, you'll notice that sounds a little hard to hear, so I've subtitled it. And the angle's a little weird because I just rested the camera on the table and tried to be discreet in recording this conversation. Okay, so in this first clip, you hear his story about how he actually physically arrived in Alaska. So if we could, Eric, we need audio on this clip.
So all 4 of the kids fit in there? Or that's how
Yeah. My wife and I in the front seat, and then
four in the back?
4 in the back with the dog, and then the back loaded up with luggage.
All that stuff?
Yeah, we started out with, I think, like 19 suitcases in Florida worth of stuff, and we were like, we're going to take what we can, and we'll take it 10 years worth of stuff. We dwindled down into 19 suitcases. And then we were like, every place that we stopped, we would stop at a Goodwill. We were like, we don't really need that. By the time we got to Washington, we had 8 suitcases. Yeah. And we were like, we're going to take these on the plane. We actually mailed them from Anchorage because we couldn't take them with us on the plane to bring them here to Village.
Okay, great. So this guy piled his family in a pickup truck, and drove from Florida up to Washington State. And then he put his truck on a barge, and they flew up to Anchorage. So he really, it was a journey for him to get there. Okay. So just to let you know about the lifestyle in Alaska, most of these people in these villages, like a lot of their food comes from the land. There's I don't think I saw a grocery. Oh, they have these little company stores, basically. Very simple stores, but that's about it. Okay. So food is generally from the land, or a lot of it is, and it's gathered usually in the summer, and winters are dark and cold up there. And if they need any additional supplies, they have to fly it in. Here in this next clip, Pastor Abel is going to talk a little bit about how food is served, or how they get it, and what they do with it up there.
But for the most part, like, we find bargains. We also shop as a community. So a couple families from the church all get together. We order Costco, and then they have they deliver it on one of the planes, and that's by ordering in bulk. We'll order like 1,500 pounds worth of stuff. It saves us a lot of money. But it also helps us to be prepared, because sometimes planes don't fly for the longest I think I've seen it so far is 7.5 weeks, and the store gets pretty bare, and so we keep fresh staples, canned things like that, flour, for 3 or 4 months worth, which really helps out too, because when things do get like that, then we cook a lot more meals to protect more. We usually have kids with stuff, because they'll get their stuff from school, they'll be there, but dinner time they'll come and then we open it up all ages, twice or 3 times. And every once in a while we'll have what they call the open table meal, where the church will get together and we'll make meals for the whole. And Heidi really kind of spearheaded that and has brought us together and do that. I think, in a village of 660 people, on a good night for open table, we can do like 400 meals. Wow. And that's all folks from the church.
Okay, so as Pastor Abel was sharing his story and the story of the church in Unalakleet, I saw this story of an outsider who arrived in Unalakleet and who was welcomed in this small community. And although he thought church ministry would just be temporary, he stayed and he continues to serve the people in his village. He's become a full pastor now. And from what I've heard from Curtis, church ministry in these villages can be difficult, as a single pastor is responsible for the care of people over areas that can be tens or hundreds of square miles. And these places are very difficult to access in colder months. It's basically by trails. These communities include some people who need help with addiction, abuse, and suicide, and higher rates of mortality. But with what little they have, those in the church there minister to others with compassion and care. So we also experienced a bit of the village's welcoming spirit ourselves. Oh, next slide. Yeah, we experienced a bit of this welcoming spirit ourselves, as just about every lunch and dinner was through the hospitality and warmth of people who live there. We got invited into people's homes everywhere, and people were very warm, very friendly, and they generously shared the food that they had, which can be hard to come by, and their friendship as well. So, I came away from this trip, and over the years I've visited and I've been a member of some pretty large churches on the mainland. I was at a church where I was a member of the congregation. It's over 10,000 people, and I can tell you that churches like that, they feel impressive. I mean, they're big. Man, worship is just amazing. Lights, everything. It's very impressive. But I have to say, I've been to church picnics at churches like that, and I felt like an outsider myself and not really welcomed. I think, and it's not intentional. I think it's just a big gathering. It's hard. Okay, it's hard to make connections. But I came away from Alaska with a deep sense of God moving even more so in these humble ministries and these imperfect villages that we visited and heard about. And I think that maybe their willingness to be a welcoming spirit to the outsider, or to be the outsider venturing in, are maybe signs of God's presence there. And even here in our little church, you know. And I also left wondering if God's presence is perhaps greater, not in these big flashy things that sometimes we get impressed by, but it's God's presence perhaps is greater in the humble, meek, and imperfect ministries that form a still small voice in this noisy, tumultuous, and shaken world. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. There's so much he was sharing, and I wanted to like chime in with like additional information. But yeah, I think we were all moved in different ways just by the hospitality. And yeah, Pat brings up a really good point. It's not about the size, right, of the church. It's the size of the hearts, right? So God is always at work. He's at work wherever. I mean, Alaska's its own conference, but they have about 15 churches in their conference spread out all over in different villages. And then you think about us, we're part of the Pacific Southwest Conference, which is many churches, but we're one church here on the island of Oahu, right? So it's, yeah, anyway. So God is always at work. And when we do our part, when we show up and we treat others as a one another, inviting each other to the table with open hands and an open heart, God can work beyond borders. And while we may want to create those boundaries sometimes, God is boundless and constantly working to give us opportunities to show love and to invite people in and to open our hearts to each other. So I hope as you hear the ministry reports today, as we dream and we think more about what if, you will keep that in mind as we do ministry together in our community and beyond. So I couldn't resist. I'm going to end our time, but I want to end it with a video that is, and I'll play it in a second because I have to set it up. It's illustrative of, I think, when I see this, it's ways in which God can work when we cast our nets or our fishing lines on the right side of the boat. It's obvious in this video that you're about to see that this is my first time really fishing. The kiddie games at the Punahou Carnival did not prepare me at all. But in my clumsy and quirky and open way, you'll notice how gracious Curtis is with the 4 bumbling people from Hawaii who are just we're all getting in the way of each other, right? And what fun we're having despite all the cold and this being a new experience. So let's see.
Woo, you're doing good. Good job, good job.
It was really heavy.
Bring your rod first. There you go. Okay, and then slowly keep it up. You want to slowly pull up. Okay. Oh, you're good. You're
Look
good.
at that expert.
Got it. Go ahead and put your bail up. To just get a little slack. Okay, that's good. Way to go. Woohoo! Oh. All right. Carol, you have Carol now has the biggest fish.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay. Great. There was a lot to be embarrassed about in that video. But our neighbor Curtis, and there's 2 of the fish that I caught. We all caught something, by the way. Pat caught the most. I'll say that, right? We all caught fish. Yeah, but Curtis kept us focused on the catch, which is really about God's people, loving people, and opening up their homes to share life together. And the 4 of us, I think, are ready to return to Alaska sometime this year to keep gathering more oral histories, to archive for someone who later on may want to use these stories to weave together something beautiful about the history of Alaska and the beautiful people that remind us to love one another and to invite one another to the table. And when that happens, whether here or at home or far away, I really want to encourage you to be ready to receive in the miraculous transformative ways of the Holy Spirit, because God is at work. So I'm going to ask Pastor Rebecca and Pastor Dan to come up to the front, and in the next few minutes we're going to be taking communion together. And you will be invited to God's table of remembrance of Jesus, who gave his life for our brokenness and sin, and the promise of eternal life one day when he returns. We are no longer strangers to God because of Christ's love. What if we treated strangers as our neighbor just as Jesus did with us?